I accidentally bought a parrot bag of birdseed instead of cockatiel, but it's like serves a good purpose right now because I like to do a little solstice tradition of feeding the wildlife. So I just set this out here for the critters to have a winter snack, and figured it's a good time to walk through what I'm thinking about doing out here. So let me get to a better spot first. Welcome back to 5 Acres Honey Farm. I wanted to share a little of my thought process with you of what I'm thinking for some of our land and for some potential critters that I'd like to add, because I love having animals and being able to kind of produce different foods for ourselves. And so one thing that my parents kind of instilled in me, because I've always liked animals from being a kid, is that I was never allowed to get a new pet until I read about like pretty much everything about the animal and their care and all of that. So that's kind of stayed with me through the acquisition of any animal. So I've been doing a lot of research the past few years, kind of on and off, of what I would want to add next and like what would be a good fit and what would be a good time for them. So I have some books that I've collected and that I'm actively reading about goats. And a few things that I've considered is that we don't consume a tremendous amount of milk or cheese, and that's not really something that I want to consume a lot of, but I would like to be able to produce what we need, and even if that's a seasonal thing, that's fine with me. And so the amount of milk that a standard size goat produces is just way too much for a household of 2. And so I'm kind of settling on like a mini variety of goats. So I'm just looking at different breeds, and I'm taking a goat class next month. It's a virtual class at the end of January. I'll put a link to the class in the description. And so in researching all this, I'm trying to figure out like if this is going to be a good fit, and so far it feels like it would be, because they would serve several purposes. Not only the food part of it, but also helping to control some invasive species here, and also just being fun addition to have around. So I'm going to show you a few different spaces where I'm thinking about keeping them, and I would love to hear if these are good ideas or bad ideas, and what suggestions you would have along the lines too. So let me flip this around to show you. My first inclination was to build a little goat barn over here. So that way they would be facing south. So I was pointing north. So this whole space would be their pasture. And I thought that would be nice. And you might notice there are a few like cedar posts around. So this area used to be the original owner's garden space. So this area, what I'm assuming was like their garden shed, and there's just a lot of debris and things that we would need to clean up in there. So I thought that might be a good spot since it already held a structure. So it's a fairly level space. So that might be a good way to reuse that little corner. Then we had a tree fall over here, and I thought, oh, this corner might be nice because I have like a trail that runs through it over to the owl house up here. So I don't want to like have them going through that part of the woods, but if it was back in the corner, then they would just have their pasture. The space could be right here, and it's just kind of like open and just seemed like a good spot. It almost seems wrong not to use this space because it's already open and cleared and just like good to be used for something. And I wanted to mention, like, over here I was thinking of adding like a trail, like the fence trail down to another fenced area for the goats. So that way they'd be able to have kind of like not really a tunnel, but a little connector point between different areas. So that was my thought here. Oh wow, I'm not sure if you can see them, but I think the deer have already smelled all of the little snacks that I just put out for them because they're coming up to the rock that has all the seed and peanuts on it. So I'm really glad the deer just showed up because they are one of the primary reasons why I don't want to fence the entire property in. I love having the wildlife come through. I also really respect that this is their space, this is their home, so I don't want to have like majority of the property fenced and excluded from them. And I do want to have spaces for them to hang out. And I don't know if I'll be able to find it, but like the deer have their babies here, and like they left their fawn right by our front door once for hours, like, which is very common for new mamas to do. So, alrighty, deer tangent over. Let's go over here. All right, my last thought for where to put, as those deer come up, they're so cute. My last thought for where to put the goat barn, which is actually my favorite spot back here, is right here on the left. Because that way I can come up the trail. I wouldn't have to walk all the way up where the deer are hanging out, where their snacks are. I wouldn't have to walk all the way up there, which was my first thought. And I'm thinking of like what would be the least amount of effort, like to, of coming back here. If the barn was here on the left, I wouldn't have to walk so far, lug feet up and all that. So if it was right here, nice and easy. Plus, if this whole pasture is fenced in, I wouldn't have to walk across a pasture or in a pasture. I could actually just access the barn independent of the fenced area, which I think would be really great. I wanted to mention that another area that would be part of their fenced space would have the seasonal creek running through it. And I don't know if that's good or bad because you don't really know the source of the water, and mud might be bad on their hooves. We're about to head up there, which is where I think the first goat space will be. And we just came from over here. And this whole space over here to the right, over to the chicken coop, I kind of want to stay away from fencing in because the neighbors on that side have dogs that run loose, and I don't want goats to be attracting them to come closer. This is a very familiar view, and so this is actually where I think would be the best initial space for the goats. So this RV port, I envision as turning that where the doors are on that enclosed area, taking those off and converting that into a goat barn. And that way we wouldn't lose the parking space underneath there. We would still use it for parking. I would imagine putting a fence right behind the hives. So if you kind of look over that structure beyond to the left, that's on our neighbor's property. So the property line runs right back down to the back in the woods there. So I would think of fencing along there so they would have all of that wooded area back up to the space where we were just exploring. But over here, you'll notice there's a rain tank. And I literally was about to go pick up gutters like tomorrow because my thought with having this rain tank that I got a few years ago and it's just been sitting there is I wanted to put gutters on the RV port and have an extra water supply here by the garden. However, as I was thinking more about the goats, I'm thinking, well, if we want to have this extra space in the woods, right now there's a hose that runs from the garden past the RV port to the house. So the water's already here, which would be great for the goats, and there's no water back in the woods. So the structure we build out there could have a rain catchment system that goes into this tank, and I could initially run the hose out to the woods, fill up the tank so that we'll have it kind of started out. So I think that would be the best thing to do. The other totally non-essential area, but I was thinking of fencing along the front here just to kind of like give them another space to roam, but also be really nice to, when you're driving in, that you get to see them, like kind of greet you. So I think that's kind of cool. I also like that this area is close to the garden, so we could be utilizing, their droppings for fertilizer. It would be simple. It was starting to get a little too dark. I know it still looks like it's light out, but it's darker than it appears there, and also pretty chilly. So I wanted to mention a few last things. One of the things that I really like about the idea of utilizing that RV port first as a goat barn is that it's pretty much like a zone 1 area. So if you're learning about permaculture, or if you already practice some permaculture skills, then you're pretty familiar with the zones concept. So your home is zone 1 and where you spend most of your time. And if you think about what traffic kind of patterns, so like where you go every day around your property, that would be your zone 1. So it doesn't necessarily have to be circular. It could be kind of a zigzag kind of, pattern, just like, the chicken coop is in the opposite direction of where the quail and the garden are. Keep things separate. Whereas, there's a lot of people who always make sure that their chicken coop is right next to their garden because they're using a lot of that compost. But I feel like I could do a whole separate video about why we have things set up the way that we do. But for now, mainly just chatting about the potential goat setup. But that's part of zone 1. And then zone 2 would be where you maybe don't go every day, but maybe once a week, once a month, and then it kind of goes out beyond that. And then I think zone 6 is your community, and thinking of those external resources. And there is usually very little talk, but I think it's important to consider zone 0, which is your house and you, because there's a lot you can dive into there too. But in any case, the RV port area, I go there every day because, the garden, the quail are over there, definitely much more often, not just once a day, but, multiple times a day during certain seasons, and with having the hives there as well. We do use that space to park vehicles, so coming and going, you have a lot of eyes on that area. So it just makes a lot of sense because we'd have a lot of visibility into the goats if they're there. That other space, kind of further in the back of the property, I like that they would have an option of eating through one particular area, or just having the variety of different pasture and foods available. So, ideally is to have all of those different areas that I just showed you fenced off and set up for the goats. And that wouldn't be something that would happen overnight. And it may be something that doesn't happen at all, because I am still just considering whether or not I would acquire goats. And, I went through the same process when I became a beekeeper. I took beekeeping school for 11 weeks and really, really dove into learning about it. And it wasn't until the very last class on the 11th week that I decided to get bees. So that may very well happen as I learn more about goats, and with that goat class that I'm taking next month, maybe there will be a light bulb moment, or the light bulb might get turned off and I'll realize that this is not really a good fit for us. Some things that I think are attractive about getting them, I mentioned earlier about, the dairy and the food aspect, helping to control the invasives. They also are producing fertilizer. So, I feel like between all of the different animals maintained here, having the variety of their fertilizer, the natural fertilizers, is a good thing to add that in. But some people that I've talked to, granted, none of them own goats, so also taking that with a grain of salt too, but they say it's too much work, especially if you're doing dairy goats, because you do have to milk every day, twice a day, you have to stay on top of it. And that is a lot to build into an already busy schedule and life. I understand that commitment, but it's also not a commitment that you need, or that I would need to make every day forever and ever. From what I've researched so far, a goat can be in milk for 300 days out of a year. So essentially the whole year. So if that was your goal, you could, have milk for pretty much a whole year and maybe store enough for the few months in between, or stagger some kidding so that you have a year-round supply. However, I don't, like I said, we don't eat that much dairy. So having the smaller breeds that are producing less, I think they would produce a quart a day, which is still way more than what we would need. The nice thing is that we could use that to trade with friends, because if they're growing something in their garden that maybe I don't grow, or if they're raising some animals that I don't grow and we want some other kinds of meats, then that's a nice thing that we could just easily trade. The other thing is that you can use it to feed other animals. So thinking ahead to the future, like if I was to acquire pigs or some other livestock that would be consuming the extra milk, then that would be like another source for it, or another use for it. And we are getting a new addition next spring. Is it going to be spring? By then, it might be late winter, early spring. That new addition will be able to consume all of the extra milk that my husband and I would not be eating. But I will mention more about that addition once we have everything finalized, so it'll be a few more months before I share more details about that. The hurdles right now would be just really making the decision if this is something we're going to do. The other is fencing, because I could get some estimates and have a company just come in and do it, which I mean would be great, but that's really expensive. And so I would just need to do some estimates for materials. So I would need to take some measurements and figure out like what would be the first space and the first phase of their pastured area. The other thing is that just thinking for the future, even if it's something if we don't get goats or any other type of livestock, what I do want to do now, because it's a good time to just put out cover crops and seed, is I've been researching like what fodder would be good to grow in the pastures. So I'm going to get some seed and start seeding those areas. So at the very least, there'll be some things in place, that it will take time. And at the end, and as far as the timing, I didn't mention that, and I'll kind of close out with that. As far as timing, because we do have a new addition that I have not shared about yet, that I'll share more in the next few months, I will have my hands full with that new addition. So I know it will take some time to get settled with new routines, and of course like all of that's entailed with introducing any animal to a home. Considering that effort, and also just knowing how busy outside of the winter life gets, it probably would be like this time next year that I would be doing the fencing, and that would allow then time to get estimates, get material, maybe find some good deals on material, get kind of that background stuff in place. And then possibly then it would be like the spring of 2024 would be like when we would acquire the animals, the goats. So I wouldn't want to have them in milk in the spring or summer because of, with beekeeping and raising the quail throughout the spring and summer and into the fall, there's just too much going on then. So I wouldn't want to overwhelm myself by already acquiring a goat that's in milk. So like my plan would be then to kind of get things in place where we would have like kidding in the fall, and then I would be able to have the time to milk throughout like the winter and into the early spring. And also from what I read, and like again, please, like total newbie learning all about this, so let me know in the comments, but from what I read, a kid can nurse for up to 3 months. Within that time, like you don't have to do all the milking yourself, you can share that with the kid. So that would also be like a nice buffer like during those few months. So I'm trying to think of like strategically timing when the kidding would happen so that I would have the time and space available to do the milking and to be able to then process the milk into cheese if that's what we wanted, or to preserve it for future use, like dehydrating, or I know some folks will freeze it, so learning more about that too. But in any case, now that I've kind of gone through all of the different thoughts that I've had about the different areas that the goats could potentially live, and my concerns and also the benefits, please do let me know in the comments what you think. If you are a goat owner, what are your words of advice? And I will share more as I learn more. So thanks.